live today. I wish I was down at the Salt Lake City rally with all the other delegates, but we have a lot of delegates to reach and we have to do these as often as possible. But my shout out goes to those delegates out there that are fighting for liberty and freedom and the right to go out and work and stand together. So thank you for all you who went out to that rally out in Salt Lake today, the ones who went to the rally in St. George, and there's one coming up in Vineyards. So we appreciate your recognition of liberty. That's very important. I'd like to thank the delegates during COVID-19. This is a difficult time. This is hard. I would rather be talking to you face to face, looking you in the eye, shaking your hand, and answering your questions as I interview for a position to you, my bosses. The state delegate role is unique among the nation, and it's so important because the convention system that Utah has makes it possible for people like me to run against the special interest money, against the people who want to destroy liberty and freedom and take over this nation, and who will sponsor $1 million worth of commercials during a primary election. So I appreciate the people who become delegates, who vet the candidates and look at the voting history of the representatives we have today. So I want to talk about, right now, I want to talk about my first 100 days in office. So we have a plan, and it's on my website, timaalders.com. That's AALDERS.com, of what we'll do the first 100 days. I'm going to add a couple items to that that's not on the website yet, but we want to support the President Trump, on getting the economy back up and running, help him repair the small business damage that's been done, help them repair and get people who are unemployed back to work in this country, and providing for their families and looking out for their interests. So that is critical role that's going to take place in the first part of the legislature next year. I also want to stand up and fight for gun liberties in this nation. The Second Amendment is very important. And next year, there's a lot of legislation that's going to come up because of this that's going to attack gun rights. Pro-life, I want to, in the first 100 days, address pro-life. I want to try and urge the Supreme Court to relook at Roe versus Wade and repeal or nullify that piece of legislation and ruling by the Supreme Court. We have to do so many things in the first 100 days. And as I said, you can find it on my website to just get a fast start and a jump start on what's going on with our nation. I've been asked by a lot of people why I'm running for office. I'm running for office because I love the Constitution of this country. And when I first got on the radio back in 2008, 2009, it was because of the economic hit America took at that time. And we're taking a bigger hit this year. What people don't understand is back in 2008, 2009, 5 million jobs were lost. And a lot of small businesses did not recover after that. Economic projections of the COVID-19 is 45 million people will lose their jobs this year. It's 900% worse than what we suffered in 2008, 2009. How are we going to recover from that? How are we going to pay all these businesses to keep them up and running? That's the situation we're facing with the economy right now. And back in 2008, 2009, I was really concerned. The first radio show I did was called Buy Back America. It was urging Americans to support Main Street businesses. The lifeblood of this nation are the mom and pop shops. They employ 60% of the people in this nation are employed by companies that employ less than 250 people, not the massive Fortune 500 companies. And that dynamic is going to change. We do not know what the new normal is going to be once we're out of this COVID-19. But we do know it's not going to be anything close to what the normal has been in our nation. People live in fear right now. They're afraid of contact with other people. They're afraid to shake hands. They're afraid to get close to people. We've already had issues with internet and our youth not communicating with people live and in person? How many of you saw groups of kids sitting in a restaurant or at a Starbucks and all of them are on their cell phones texting each other because they don't know how to communicate in person? And that's a real concern because it attacks family values. It attacks the social aspect of our nation. So that is going to be of grave concern, is how do we get our country back to work in the new normal, and how do we get back to normal? Businesses won't operate the same. Airlines won't operate the same. Entertainment aspects won't be the same. So it's going to be difficult. And we need business-minded people to support our president to get our nation back up and running. So I'm one of those people, ever since I've been on the radio, who loves to look at legislation. So I look at proposed legislation that's in committees, the Judicial Committee or different committees. There's many different committees in the House and in the Senate that propose legislation. It has to get through committee before it goes up for a vote. So I start looking at legislation early. Why is that important? Because many of the people, well, not even many, almost 95% of our elected politicians today don't read legislation. They rely on special interest groups and staff to tell them what to vote for. Legislation is out early enough. If you read it early enough, you can see what's up and coming, and then you should be able to come back to the people in your district and advise them on what you're seeing in the upcoming legislation and tell them what you find, whether it's constitutional or not, or if it's paid for, or if it's going to put the nation more in debt. And then get the feel from what the people in your district want you to vote for. Mind you, you should never vote against your oath of office. The oath of office is extremely important. The founding fathers believed that the inherent rights of people were granted to them by God. And there's only two forms of thinking on this. Either you believe that liberty and your freedoms, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, came from God or nature's supreme being or whatever you want to call it, or you believe it comes from man. If it comes from God, then man cannot take it away. If it comes from man, then whenever the next group of strong men who dominate your lives can change and take away your liberties and affect your life. That's why my parents came to this nation. They came to this nation after the Germans invaded Holland after World War II, because they wanted to live in a country that was the only country on the planet with a constitutional republic that recognized the liberties and freedom of the people of the country. So everybody who's elected to office swears an oath. They lay one hand on the Bible and raise one hand to the square and swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution from both foreign and domestic enemies. Right now, the biggest threat's coming from domestic. It's coming from our own representatives in Congress. But that's a sacred covenant with God that you're going to protect the rights and liberties of mankind. So when I see representatives from this state or representatives from other states that vote against the Constitution, I have to take pause. How could they violate their oath of office? Now, there is a whole section on the penalties for violating the oath of office. It's U.S. Code, USC 5, Section 5. Section 7311 is my favorite one, because when everybody was trying to impeach President Trump, these people trying to impeach him promote socialism or promote our country as a democracy. Section 7311 of USC Code 5 states that you cannot hold public office if you promote any form of government other than our constitutional republic. Why didn't the Republicans at that time call out the Democrats for actually violating their oath and ask for them to be removed from office? Well, courage is hard to muster because Washington, D.C. is ran by massive amounts of money. And people who give massive amounts of money to campaigns expect the people who receive that money to vote accordingly to their views and opinions. That's why we don't see people going against the status quo. That's why they don't go against Democrats. That's why Democrats don't really go against Republicans. That's why bills that violate our liberty and freedom get passed. So we have to stand up. In my first 100 days in office, that's what I want to do. And we have people right now on the computers taking your questions on Facebook Live. I'm going to get to some of those questions. I have some now. So first question is, what legislation do you think will come up in Congress next session with regards to COVID-19? As I stated earlier, COVID-19 is changing the world. It's going to be a new norm. What many of the constitutional advocates, watchdog groups in Washington, D.C. are telling me is that the UN is going to use COVID-19 as a power grab. And there's already legislation being written by special interests in Washington that will make it so government can remove constitutional rights. Not constitutional rights, but remove your liberties and freedoms God gave you, protected by the Constitution, if the government sees a crisis big enough to do so. How does that make you feel that these pieces of legislation that can take away your liberty automatically are going to be in Congress next year? Is your representative that you have going to vote against these? Is he going to know what's in it? Is he or she going to stand up and say, no, this violates the God-given rights of the people of this nation in our constitutional republic? And the UN does not dictate US policy. That's what you have to ask yourself. That's why I want to run for Congress, because I believe in your constitutional protected rights that God gave you. And I'm not afraid to stand up and say, no, this bill violates those rights. Other liberties that are going to come across is firearms. Because of COVID-19, they're worried about people stockpiling arms. If you notice throughout the countries, gun stores stayed open as essential business, and they had some of the most astronomical sales numbers because people were stocking up on guns and ammunition. They want to limit that. They want access to it. They want to be able to take it away with these red flag laws. Red flag laws are anybody can make a complaint against anybody who owns guns. Well, if the government gets access and knows you're buying guns, the government can make complaints against you, and you can lose your guns without even due process of law. They're also going to make regulations that agencies like the health department or the CDC or WHO can come in and shut down businesses without even governor's approval or congressional approval. Will your elected official that you have today stand up for your rights? Those are questions you're going to have to ask yourself, because it is coming, folks. COVID-19 is changing the dynamics of the world, and it's changing the way people look at policy and legislation. So as I say this, 19 states already have red flag laws as current law in their states. 11 more states are considering it. We don't know what's proposed in Utah yet, but watch out for it, because it could be coming to a neighborhood near you. And we have to stand up and fight. Your freedoms and liberties are the most important piece of legislation. We have to stand up and make sure that our elected officials are representing us and protecting those. We have another question I will read. It says, why am I so critical of John Curtis's vote on the Patriot Act? Well, it's one of the reasons I decided to run. There are a lot of votes that are forgivable votes. I might not like the name on a new post office that they name after some Utah athlete, but is it a critical vote? No. The critical votes to me are the ones that A, affect your wallet, and B, affect your liberties and freedoms. The Patriot Act, when it came out, America wanted it because at that time they were living in fear. It was after 9/11. The towers had just come down. The Pentagon was attacked. And the news riled people up into a frenzy of where the next terrorist attack was going to happen. And law enforcement wanted the ability to collect data on anybody, anywhere, foreign governments, foreign citizens, and American citizens. And when the Patriot Act came out, Congress didn't write the legislation. The NSA, the FBI, the CIA all contributed on what they wanted to do for decades. And they put in Section 215, which violated many of the sovereign liberties of the people of this nation. The Patriot Act had what was called a sunset clause. Some states like Texas, every piece of legislation has a sunset clause because laws don't necessarily need to go on forever. So the Patriot Act was expiring, and Jerry Nadler, a Democrat from New York, proposed a piece of legislation, and I normally know that by heart right now, HR 6172. What that did was it extended the provisions of the Patriot Act almost indefinitely, unless Congress goes in and nullifies or repeals it. That gives the government a right to collect your data, to do warrantless searches on you, to ask third-party people for information on you, collect your emails, your phone calls, all that type of stuff. Now, some people would use the argument, hey, if the government wants to listen to my phone calls, no problem. Well, you say no problem until they find out that you're storing food, that you're preparing for a future catastrophe, because then under the Patriot Act, you're labeled as a domestic terrorist. That's not good for you. That's not good for the people. So votes like that are critical votes for me, because if you put your hand on the Bible and swear an oath to defend the liberties, you're swearing an oath to defend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, Second, Third, Fourth, Fifth, all the way on up. And the Patriot Act, by rulings of district courts and even the Supreme Court, state that it violates many of those amendments, the First, the Fourth, the Fifth. So when congressional people that represent you will violate the very thing they swear an oath not to violate, you should take pause. Like I said, there's a lot of legislation. Almost 2/3 of the legislation is naming somebody a hero or giving somebody a congressional award. Many of those type of things don't matter. But if it affects you directly in your pocket or your liberties or your freedoms, and a politician votes to violate those, you should take pause and not allow that person to represent you, because what will they do next? That being said, somebody once told me, and it was a delegate I was speaking with today, said that his father used to tell him, if I vote for a politician, I'm not going to name a name, he named a name to me today, and that politician as a delegate goes back to Washington and votes to violate the Constitution, because I voted to him, I'm not responsible because I did not know he or she would go back and do that. But if I'm a delegate the next time around and that politician comes through and I vote for him or her again, and they violate the Constitution again, then I share the responsibility. I share the violation of the oath of office. I share the breaking of the covenant with God to protect those liberties and freedom. It is a very sacred duty that you delegates have to make sure you know the voting history. And you might like 2/3 of the vote that your congressional person or your senator does, or even your governor on a state level, or your House or Senate on a state level. But if they violate the Constitution of Utah or the Constitution of the United States, that's unforgivable in my mind. And there's no excuse to say, I didn't read it, I didn't know, everybody else voted for it. Just because everybody else does it doesn't mean you should, especially when you represent multiple hundreds of thousands of people in your district. It's just not right, and it's unacceptable. So I ran against John Curtis, partially because of that vote, but others. So we're still taking questions. You can still go to my website, timaalders.com, AALDERS. And my Facebook is Tim Aalders for Congress. And my phone number is 801-706-1484. I had many of you call after the last. Reports from US Intel say China deliberately hid the COVID-19 outbreak and that it came from a Chinese lab. How should the US hold China accountable? You know, I read a lot of scientific diagnosis on this virus, whether it was DNA, whether it was RNA, whether it was synthesized in a lab, or whether it was naturally came about in nature. But some of the reports we're seeing are almost undeniable. We're not seeing everything that the congressional people are being briefed on by the national security or the agencies that might have the full proof. But if China deliberately did this and caused deaths across the nation, caused multiple trillions of dollars in damages to small businesses throughout the world, they should be held accountable, just like Germany was held accountable for World War II. They had to supply compensation for the people they put in camps, for the damages they did, for the rebuilding of nations. China should be held accountable. Will the UN do it? Probably not. Will the United States do it? It depends. With who we currently have in Congress, more than likely not. China holds a lot of our US debt. China owns most of our food sources. Most of the pharmaceutical pills and opioids and medicines are produced in China. China basically controls the economy. They don't have to. Up until the 1990s, they didn't. We did. So this is one of the important reasons America needs to get back to self-sufficient. But I believe if it is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, because America relies on the providing of evidence to prove guilt. If China is guilty of this, they should be held accountable by our Congress. And sanctions and other things should be discussed on how to make China pay compensation to the people in America and other nations that were affected. So I firmly believe that. One of the other votes that was critical to me to run was the extension of the Equal Rights Amendment. Equal Rights Amendment came out in about 1972, and it was a very simple document that said women are equal to men. It's a little bit more than that. That's the basic terms of it. It's a very short and precise amendment. The problem with the amendment is for the last 2 years, in the resurgence of the Equal Rights Amendment, trying to get it ratified, even though it expired, is Democrats and pro-choice people are getting rulings by Supreme Courts throughout the nation that are using the Equal Rights Amendment to justify abortion. It's happened in New Mexico in 1999. It happened in Connecticut and other places, at least 5 that I know of, maybe more. Jerry Nadler, you know, my favorite Democrat from New York, has touted it as the replacement for Roe versus Wade if our conservative Supreme Court removes the ruling on Roe versus Wade, overturns it, and makes abortions illegal. The ERA will replace that ruling. So that should be something anyone who is pro-life should be nervous about. And any congressional person who voted to extend that amendment to be ratified should have been able to see that information and know that information, since they worked side by side with these Democrat politicians who are promoting this as the replacement for abortion. It doesn't take much. If you Google ERA justification for abortion, you'll pull up the rulings yourself. So don't take my word on it, search it out yourself. But that also was very concerning to me. One of the very interesting things when I was on the radio back in 2010 through 2012, immigration was a very hot topic. Immigration seems to be a very hot topic every election cycle. What I find interesting is nobody's proposed changes to the immigration laws. We just keep fighting over punishment. Now, I'm the son of immigrants. I'm a first-generation American. My parents both immigrated here from Holland after World War II, seeking a better life. They came here legally. They came here with sponsors. They even had to have a place that would hire my father prior to him being here and certify that for their visa. So I am not anti people who want to move to this country for a better life. And it irritates me when people use the compassion argument and then take out every other flaw to having our open borders. So one of the things I want to do in my first 100 days is support and get our border secured. That was another one of my topics because it's important to us, not because of people who are trying to bring their families here. If you talk to any border agent, any sheriff on the border, the majority of people coming across that border are not families. They are people smuggling drugs, people smuggling guns. You have people from Asian nations coming in, Middle Eastern people being caught at the border with ties to terrorist organizations. There's much more coming across that border than just people seeking a better life. Now, I also understand immigration laws need to be fixed. And it irritates me that neither side, Democrats who are supposedly the most compassionate or Republicans, have tried to look at the immigration laws, research them, and see what's wrong with them. I was speaking to a couple delegates that are, one that's an immigration lawyer, one who's a Spanish teacher in Alpine School District, who used the compassion argument. And my concern is, okay, so everybody coming across the border is good. And they pretty much believe that. And I said, so I can go pick anybody who's here illegally and they can come stay in your house. And they're like, well, no, because I haven't vetted them. I don't know them. It's the same thing for our country. We can't just accept people here if we don't know them or we haven't talked to them or vetted them. Now, a lot of these people have been working in America illegally for 2 years, 3 years, even more. And we should make their bosses, the people that hired them, sign a letter telling us how long they've worked for them. Proof of employment in America and proof of not having a criminal record in America goes a long way. They need to pay a price for the crime they committed in coming here illegally. There's fees. The employers who hire these people and entice them to come here should be responsible for those fees. And then these people should have a legal way to approach it with sponsors like my parents had. But just waving this magic pen that says everybody that's in this country illegally right now is a good person, so we're going to forgive their violations of US law and we're going to allow them to stay here permanently. That's not a vetting system. That's not a process we should go to. Either we're a constitutional republic based on a rule of law, or none of our laws mean anything, and that's a real scary situation to live under. So yes, securing our border is important for more reasons than families trying to come across into America. COVID-19 proved the fact that we need to know if people coming into this country are sick or not. And everybody, even the Democrats who don't want our border secured, wanted everybody coming in from other nations to be tested for COVID-19. Well, if they're coming here illegally across the border, they're not being tested. So you're making the argument for us who believe we need to safely allow people into this nation. You know, we have a lot of issues, a lot of legislation. A lot of legislation that gets passed isn't important legislation. And those are the legislative things that politicians show you on their commercials. because, you know, they look like heroes when they do these type of things. They're not out there touting the extension of the Patriot Act. They're not out there touting this other stuff. So we really need to do our duty as citizens to make sure that we're vetting these people. What do you know about the Antiquities Act? So recently I was endorsed by Morgan Philpott. Morgan Philpott ran against Jim Matheson, and then the next time he ran for governor of the state of Utah. He also happened to be one of the attorneys on the Bundy case. Now, what I'm going to talk about isn't whether the Bundys were right or wrong. They were proved innocent in 2 courts, Nevada and Oregon. I did happen to go out to the Bundy Ranch, and if you weren't out at the Bundy Ranch and you didn't see snipers working for the BLM and the militarized police force that the wilderness departments of our nation have, it was insane. So Morgan Philpott endorsed me recently because of something called the Antiquities Act. The Antiquities Act actually made it so that our Parks Department, our BLM, and other areas of the government can be more militarized. Post office has its own police force. Even here in Utah, the UTA has their own police force. But it gives the BLM equipment that matches that of the military. And you're giving it to people who abuse the rights, killing people's cattle, violating the law, the rule of law to supposedly enforce a law of not paying for grazing fees or whatever it was about is not good, and it's not right. And passing the Antiquities Act, where the Constitution does not grant those agencies even the right to exist, but to militarize them in a way that takes away the rights of local sheriffs and local police departments, is wrong. And my opponent voted in favor of this. So it's one of those situations where you have to ask yourself, do you want to be up fishing or riding an ATV or taking a jaunt up the canyon and have people with M16 stop you in the mountains? It's insane. You think about it and you say it can never happen to me, but there is no legal justification for the BLM or the Division of Wildlife Services to be militarized. It just isn't. We're not even allowed to have military in states without a governor's approval. But now we're militarizing federal agencies within states with national parks. It just violates everything the Constitution's about. So I appreciate Morgan Philpott's endorsement. I appreciate his knowledge into that topic. It educated me. That's one of the things that another role that delegates play and you as citizens should play. We're not experts in every field. I'm not in the medical profession, but we have serious issues with healthcare in America. And COVID-19 made it worse because with 45 million people expected to be unemployed, they're going to lose their insurance. COBRA's expensive. How are we going to take care of those? We're bankrupting hospitals as it is by not doing any surgeries, but that are non-essential. So we're going to have healthcare problems in this nation. It's a congressman's responsibility to meet with healthcare providers in his or her district and get advice on how we're going to overcome these issues that are coming and coming up quickly. So on issues we don't know, we have to research and we have to get with professionals to help us. And then we have to advise the constituents of our district with what's going on in our nation. So that's another one. If you have questions, remember to submit them. We do have people watching the Facebook live stream. You can call me later if you're shy at 801-706-1484. And my website's my name, Tim Aalders. That's AALDERS.com. So Congress seems dysfunctional in many ways. How can we reform Congress and make it more for the people? Well, the Constitution is a great document and people should really read it quite often. And we should teach it in our schools because Congress actually delegates to, the Constitution delegates to Congress what powers they have, what job functions they're supposed to do. The problem with Congress is at some point in history, they decided it would be easier to make agencies to do jobs than to do it themselves. This doesn't, it has nothing to do with Congress is too busy to oversee some of these areas. It's congressional people like the rock star feeling. They like being taken out to concerts and football games and golfing and having lobbyists fly them all over for speaking events where they get paid extra on top of their congressional budget, their congressional pay. We need people in Congress who will stand up against this. And it's hard. Mind you, the RNC and the DNC have a lot of power over people who get elected as a Republican or Democrat. Fundraising, they hold it against them. So if we allow only money to dictate who gets elected, we're going to allow the private organizations of the RNC and DNC to dictate policy. But not everybody's afraid to go against the RNC and DNC. Mike Lee's been doing it for years here in Utah. He was elected 8 years ago, and he isn't afraid to challenge them if they want something done that's unconstitutional. People like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz are trying to get Congress to operate within their own authority. They're also trying to maintain that the president only operates under his or her authority. So it's not unheard of, but if we don't elect people that are going to start operating within congressional guidelines and setting the example, we're never going to change the way Congress works. And that's up to you. It's up to how you elect and how you vote. You know, I had delegates ask me, how do you keep your principles? Washington's a cesspool. There seems to be something in the water that our congressional people tell us one thing, but as soon as they get to Washington, they change their mind. Well, I had a good friend that used to come on my radio show quite often from Colorado as a Republican representative. Only lasted 2 years because he could not handle the corruption in Washington. He used to call me and say, this is unbelievable. And I asked him once, how do you avoid that corruption? And he said, spend more time in your state than you do in Washington. You can research legislation at home. You can research legislation in your own district. Why do politicians then stay in Washington so long? Well, the parties want them there for fundraising events. They want them there to give speeches to lobbyists and to corporations. So these corporations will make large donations to the party. If you keep electing people who rely on those donations and that funding, then you're going to get exactly what we have now. I've pledged to spend more time in the state and be in Washington when it's necessary for votes, not to stay there as my daily life, raise my family there, and party in Washington, D.C. I'm well above that stage in my life. It's not impossible to stand on principle. Like I said, Mike Lee and others do it daily. Yes, the repercussions could be hard. The news will go after you. The party will go after you. But what's more important, being reelected or standing on principle? For some of us, it's standing on principle. So we've covered a lot of items so far. If you have other questions, make sure you ask. The US government is so far along the socialist path, how can you get us out of socialism? Claron, did I say it right? If If I butchered your name, I apologize. Yes, America has gone more socialist. And yes, it is the members of Congress who are ultimately responsible, but it's also us. We've allowed it to happen. And can me alone fix socialism? No. But one of the things I want to do is give my speech. Every freshman congressman is granted a speech on the House of the floor of Congress. It's one of the only times all members of Congress are there to listen and watch. It's an important thing to have someone who will give a speech that reminds them of placing their hand on that Bible and swearing the oath to our constitutional republic, for calling out those that have been promoting socialism in a public forum, televised on C-SPAN, and letting the American people know what they've been allowing. I'm looking forward to that speech. I'm looking forward to not giving it in an angry tone, not being rude, not name calling, but just utilizing facts of how they are guiding our country out of what they swore they'd protect our country to be. We are a socialist nation. I have no problem writing and presenting legislation that will bring America on track, but it's going to take a while to get it passed. I'm not saying I want to be in Congress long enough to see it fulfilled. I'm not saying we can even do it, but if nobody ever tries, how do we know what can be accomplished? What I'm promising the people of District 3 is I want you to hold me accountable, and I will do what I say I'm going to do. I'm going to go for standalone legislation. I'm going to try and get on the Accountability Commission there in the House and oversee these agencies and call them and ask them about their mission statements and what they've accomplished. And if they haven't accomplished anything in 30 years, they need to be disbanded, and that'll be my recommendation. I'm not afraid to call the Supreme Court and ask them to investigate somebody who's violating their oath of office and promoting socialism over the Constitution. I have a list of names right now: Bernie Sanders, Alexander Ortiz, that I want to submit right now to get them investigated by the Supreme Court. And there are others that if I do it, will follow my lead. Not many, but it's a start. So every snowball starts small, and as it rolls downhill, it gets bigger. Being afraid and being non-believing that we can ever change anything isn't going to make change happen. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That's from Einstein. If we want to change government, it starts small. It starts with one person. I want to be that one person. And I'm asking you as delegates to vote for me and give me that chance. And if in 2 years you feel I've not done it, in 2 years you say I violated the Constitution, I expect the convention to remove me. In fact, if you can prove and tell me that I violated the Constitution, I wouldn't even run again, because that means I did a disservice to this district. So yes, we are in a problem in this nation. We are moving more and more towards socialism. A lot of people that I know in these congressional and constitutional watchdog groups say we're already there. We're already more socialist than some European nations right now. As they move closer to freedom, we're moving farther away. What's really funny, and it's not funny, haha. What's interesting is these people who want socialism in our nation have never talked to the immigrants that fled socialism to come here. You know, we had people their whole life, and Disney's made movies about people who wanted to flee socialism, who tried flying over the wall in homemade blimps in Germany, who tried digging under walls, who came here on boats like my parents, who tried to swim the canal to get away from socialism and come to America. Yet, if America turns socialist, where can the people who want a constitutional republic go? Name me one other constitutional republic in the world. If you want socialism and these politicians want socialism, I can give them a list of places they can migrate to. There's plenty of places they can leave. I'll even help them pack. But the problem with it is they're trying to change what made America great, what made us the biggest and best and largest producing company in the nation up until 1993, until socialism started to be introduced. What's also interesting, if you read articles written by the Chinese government, military powers, and the Russian government on how they can take over America, they used to say, we can never fight a war in America because everybody has guns. How we win against America is we introduce socialism into their schools. We introduce the idea of free things from government. And this is what Benjamin Franklin feared the most. When people learn that they can use government to take from one group to give to another, our nation will fall. And this is what foreign powers that hate our constitutional republic want and know they had to do. They had to entice and teach our generation of children that socialism is good. This is why the Department of Education has been the worst thing America could ever have, because it promotes socialism. It promotes values that go against those of our constitutional republic. And I've heard so many people talk about getting rid of the Department of Education, yet I fail to see very many people present legislation to do so. So yes, we have an issue with socialism in our nation as it stands. Our youth are being raised not on what socialism really is, but what the Marx used to tell you what socialism can be. That why should you work if you can get people who are working pay for you? The problem with socialism is the people who want to invent and start a company, when they make less and less because the state takes it away to distribute to other people, they say, why don't I just stop working and get on the government dole? And eventually the governments run out of other people's money to give away. And that's the scary thing. That's the direction we're heading. And we don't teach that. We don't teach how many people socialist rulers have killed over generations because their demand was more than their supply. So yes, if you want to taste the socialism, look at COVID-19. I remember stories of my parents telling me under German rule that the local stores had no food on their shelves. Didn't many of you see that now? The food supply is short when people demand it. And it gets to the point where the government tells you you can have 1 gallon of milk. What happens if you have a family of 6 or 7? And that needs to last you 2 weeks. So we had a taste of Bernie Sanders socialism with COVID-19. How did you like it? How do you like staying home because government mandates it? How do you like not being able to see your family and give them a hug? I know I'm not enjoying it. And nobody else is. That's why you have the rallies going on in Salt Lake right now. James wants to know my thoughts on the stimulus package. Well, Congressman Massey was right to vote against it. Now, when the government mandates shutdowns, that's called a taking. It's just like if the government wants to put a road where your house is and they want to tear down your house, they have to pay you for that house. It's a taking. Businesses did not shut down voluntarily. Businesses were told they had to shut down. And the stimulus package was brought up so fast, and it was well over 891 pages. This was not written in the week or 2 weeks that COVID-19 became a crisis. This was every member of Congress that had somebody to pay back or a campaign donor that they owed a promise to, thrown into a package where they decided to give every American $1,200. I know a lot of Americans who pay massive taxes that didn't get to 1,200, didn't get to 2,400 as a couple. But they're going to have to pay back 38,000 just like every other American. Small businesses, $349 billion for the amount of businesses, small businesses registered in America. Utah has over 543,000 small businesses. That's businesses with less than 250 employees. This package was meant to keep employees working and keep companies able to pay payroll, and it would be forgiven. The problem is it ran out within days, and the large majority of businesses aren't being helped. So they're looking at the CARE Act too. The other problem is unemployment's now giving people who make $9, $10, $11 an hour, $600 a week, which averages out to about $15 an hour. Why would they want to go back to work? And the new Democratic proposal is to give everybody in America $2,000 a month until 60% of 16 to 60-year-olds are working again. Well, when you have 42 million households in America making less than $18,000 a year, isn't $2,000 a month a raise? If I know my numbers, that's $24,000. Why would you go back to work? How long can we keep putting this debt on future generations, which is wrong by any account, to pay these people who then have no reason to go back to work because they're making more money than they would in their jobs? I would have voted against the stimulus package. I think because of what the government did, something had to be done by government. But what they did is now being proven for Congressman Massey and radio people and activists across the country who knew it was a bad thing. They're starting to be proved right, but it's too late to be proved right because it already added trillions to our national debt, and we're still losing businesses that are going to shutter and close down permanently. So I was opposed to the stimulus package. I believe we needed some sort of a package, but I also don't believe we should have shut down America the way we shut down America. So I guess I better elaborate on that. Essential businesses were supposed to be left open. Now, if you can go into a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a gun store or in Utah, a liquor store, I don't know how they're essential. You can't go to your dentist, you can't go to your doctor, but you can go buy a fifth of whiskey. We could have asked restaurants, yes, open, but limit your customers. Let your customers sit one table apart from each other instead of filling every table in your store. We could have made suggestions to businesses and let businesses decide. You can decide whether or not you wanted to self-quarantine and stay at home. I hate to tell you this, you cannot regulate stupidity. And if people, and I'm not saying everybody who wants to go out is stupid, don't get me wrong, but you cannot tell people if they're immune compromised, if they have other underlying issues, which most of the deaths from COVID-19 have been proven, they had other underlying issues. They could have self-quarantined, they could have stayed out of the public, but if I want to go out in the public and I get COVID-19 and I die, that's not on you, that's on me because it was a decision I made. Some people use the thing, well, we're able to mandate that people wear seatbelts. Does everybody wear a seatbelt that you know? Mandate that everybody who rides a motorcycle wears a helmet. Well, that's not true either. I see people on motorcycles all the time without a helmet. People who don't want to do something will violate the law, even though it's law. So to mandate people to stay home so this does not spread, when we should have been teaching better health practices, we should have been talking about hand sanitization and giving people a little personal freedom and a personal space. But if we can have liquor stores open, why can't we have a restaurant open? We're making, some of the people I know that drink are drinking multipliers of 2, 3, 4 times more than they did before this shutdown. So we're creating all kinds of other health issues. It's funny because you watch people on Facebook post how much weight they've gained during their stay at home because they're enjoying the Oreos or the Cheetos or the Doritos. Those of you who grew up and are old enough to remember N1H1, N1H1 had a higher mortality rate. Millions of people in America caught N1H1. Yet, the media at that time did not create this fear. And we did not shut down businesses. We told people to be safe. We told people if they were sick to stay home, if they're showing symptoms. It was the same thing with other diseases that we've had that have killed lots of people. Why is it the government's forcing this shutdown to protect lives, but they've allowed the tobacco industry to kill 1,300 people a day for generations? Well, because it generates money and that money goes into campaigns. So they don't care if it kills, if they're getting paid. So and people say, well, if I want to smoke and get cancer and die, how does that affect you? Well, secondhand smoke is proven to die. And we've made laws against that, but we didn't shut down businesses. There's more smoke shops now than there was in the 90s and in the 80s. So we pick and choose as a society when we want to overreact and when we don't want to overreact. And that's the problem freedom-loving people have, is if you're going to overreact, you should overreact on every issue and not just one, because there's lots of things that can kill you every day you walk out your door. Automobiles kill more people than most things in life, but automobiles also provide a convenience for you, right? And they have lobbyists and it employs people. So we're not going to stop automobiles because it kills. So it's just, sometimes you need to use logical thought. And sometimes you just have to be smart. If you want to shutter your business, stop serving people, shut the doors, lay off your employees, that's up to you. It shouldn't be up to the government. So we're talking about a lot of things. People have asked me my opinion on pro-life. I'm very pro-life. I believe these unborn children have a right to live. And I'll get back to this. What's the difference, the biggest difference between me and John Curtis? Well, John Curtis is a nice guy. I consider myself a nice guy. John Curtis is easy to talk to. He will communicate. I will communicate. I guess the biggest difference between me and John Curtis, and I'm not a fan of labels, is I'm more constitutional. I care about your rights and liberties. And I research and read legislation. John Curtis on multiple town halls have said, I didn't read it. Everybody else was voting for it, so I did. That's not the way I want my congressman to act. I'm the person that will take my responsibility serious. I'll read the legislation and I'll update you on what I read, what I've learned about it. I think every piece of legislation should have questions asked. A, is it constitutional? Does it affect my liberties and freedoms? B, is it paid for? How's it paid for? Is it going to put our nation in debt? And 3, if it's going to add more to our debt, where can we cut so it won't? What agencies are going to give up money? That's the difference between me and John Curtis. I wouldn't have voted for amnesty. I wouldn't have voted for the extension of the Patriot Act that violates your rights and liberties. I wouldn't have voted to extend the ERA because I've researched them. You shouldn't vote on something you haven't read and researched. And the difference is my whole life I've been a researcher. I like reading legislation. I like talking to people about legislation. I like getting advice on legislation too. But ultimately, it's my job to protect the people of the district, just like it is for Curtis or Bishop and anybody else that's Mike Lee, Mitt Romney. It's their job to vote correctly to their oath of office. And so the biggest difference is I am a constitutional conservative. I believe that keeping your rights and liberties intact is the most important thing that we can do in this nation. And that's what I'll fight for. And it's proven that he hasn't. From Colton, do you stand behind Romney's vote to convict Trump? No. Where is the evidence? You can't impeach somebody for being unliked. Bill Clinton had an affair in office. You know, his impeachment didn't stand and nobody threw a fit about it. The whole thing is, if President Trump violated the Constitution and US law and it was impeachable, I support Trump, but then I would have voted to impeach Trump. But the hatred for Trump goes well beyond anything that I've seen in any president in our nation. Mitt Romney made his vote based on his feelings towards the president, not on research, in my opinion, not on facts. Now, did he have the right to do that vote? He's a senator. He has one right, one vote. And if the people who voted for Romney wanted that, then that's his right. But I would have wanted to sit down with Romney and have him share the facts of why he believes the president should have been impeached. And we didn't see all the facts. I watched the trials like many others. I didn't see the evidence. I saw the anger. I saw the hatred. I saw the dislike of his Twitter account. I saw the dislike of him as a human being, but I didn't see evidence of anything. If Obama or the Bushes would have asked for an investigation of somebody who they felt was violating the law, like Biden's son, nobody would have said anything. The media wouldn't have said anything because the media don't hate them. What went on in the Ukraine needed to be investigated. It still does need to be investigated. But you listen to those people who testified and they said, listen, Trump didn't tell me to do this. I assumed that that's what the president wanted me to do. Well, should you be punished because somebody assumes you wanted them to violate a law and then you're held accountable for it? Well, Bob over there, I assumed he wanted me to rob that bank, so I did. So he's complicit in that. Assumption doesn't mean anything. Not one of those people said, the president told me to do this, that I saw. So I would have sat down with Mitt Romney and asked him, what evidence are you seeing that I'm not? Just like I want to do with the agencies, justify your actions. Tell me why. I don't fault him. It took courage to do what he did. But no, I wouldn't have voted the same way as him because I didn't see what he saw. Remember, you can find out my issues and everything. We're emailing you now. We got direct mails coming out. You can go to my website, timaalders.com. That's AALDERS. Tim Aalders for Congress is my Facebook. We're going to be doing more of these town halls and tele-town halls for a chance for delegates to join with us. I hope if you see what you when you watch these and you listen to me and I answer your questions, if you like me, you'll share this and become part of this campaign. I tell people all the time, this is your campaign as much as it is me. You're District 3, you're my boss. If you want to make a change in Congress and you want that change to be me, then I want your support at convention, but I also want your support online. I want your support in social media. We need to fight to take this country back. And I'm willing to be your vessel in Washington, D.C. to stand on the principles of the Constitution. How much time do we have? Oh, okay, we're wrapping up. We don't have any more questions in front of me. You can reach out to me anytime with questions, 801-706-1484. I hope you enjoy the rest of your night and the rest of your Saturday. And thank you so much for watching.